All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking Henry David Thoreau's classic essay, which is simply titled Walking. But as we're about to see, this is definitely not just some casual guide on how to put one foot in front of the other. It is a radical historical cure for a disease we're all a little too familiar with today, our absolute obsession with staying indoors. I want you to ask yourself a question right off the bat. When was the last time you truly took a walk? I mean a real walk. Because honestly, rushing to your car, pacing around your office while you're on a conference call, or even logging miles on a treadmill, that absolutely does not count in Thoreau's eyes. Not even a little bit. He's talking about something so much deeper, a practice that he says requires a direct dispensation from heaven. Think about the fact that this text was actually published way back in 1862. You'd probably think his concerns would be completely outdated by now, right? But it's actually astonishing how perfectly his 19th century observations diagnose our 21st century screen-addicted lives. I mean, he was writing this before the internet, before smartphones, before the modern cubicle even existed. Yet his critique hits closer to home now than it ever has. Thoreau was just absolutely baffled by the culture of his day. He saw it as this sort of 3 p.m. indoor epidemic. He describes looking at mechanics and shopkeepers just sitting there with their legs crossed all day long, as if their legs were literally made to sit upon and not to stand on. He confesses his total amazement that by late afternoon, there isn't a general explosion of madness heard up and down the street. He seriously wonders how these people don't just detest themselves for starving out their own natural vitality. So, what is all this indoor time actually doing to us? Well, Thoreau argues it's doing something profound, and he sets up a really striking contrast. Staying looked inside produces a literal and metaphorical thinness of skin. It makes us soft, it makes us overly sensitive and easily bruised by the world. But on the flip side, living out of doors, out in the sun and the wind, that builds a thick skin. It produces a rugged heroism, a callus of experience that actually allows us to thrill to the finer things in life, all because we're firmly anchored in physical reality instead of just languishing inside. And this is where we get to the crucial point, how he completely redefines this activity. He elevates walking into what he calls sauntering, and he gives us these two beautiful poetic origins for the word from the Middle Ages. The first is à la saunterer, meaning someone roaming the country asking for charity under the pretense of going to the Holy Land, a Holy Lander. The second is saunterer, without land, meaning you have no particular home, but you are equally at home everywhere. For Thoreau, every single walk is a crusade. It's not a commute. It's an act of going forth to reconquer the Holy Lands from the hands of the infidels of our own daily anxieties. Now, to really grasp sauntering, we also have to understand what it isn't. Thoreau aggressively separates true walking from what we would call exercise. He actually makes fun of the idea of swinging dumbbells for health at stated hours. He compares it to a sick person taking bitter medicine. Why stay in a room lifting iron, he asks, when the true, bubbling springs of life are out in far-off pastures just waiting for you? True walking is the adventure of the day itself. He even drops this fantastic, honestly surprising detail. He challenges us to walk like a camel. Yeah, a camel. Why? Because it's supposedly the only beast that ruminates, meaning it literally chews its cud, or metaphorically, it digests its thoughts, while it walks. Walking isn't mindless for Thoreau. It's the ultimate intellectual and spiritual catalyst. He actually quotes Wordsworth's servant, who, when someone asked to see her master's study, said, well, here's his library, but his study is out of doors. So picture this. You step out your front door right now. You have absolutely no destination, no errands to run, no specific route. Which direction does your instinct pull you? Thoreau argues there's a subtle magnetism in nature, and if we unconsciously yield to it, it will direct us aright. We aren't just going to wander aimlessly in circles. For him, that internal needle always settles west or southwest. He says he turns round and round, irresolute sometimes for a quarter of an hour, but he always ends up heading west. To him, the East represents the dusty history of civilization, retracing the steps of the past, studying old institutions. But the West? The West is the unexhausted future. It's absolute freedom, enterprise, and the wild, uninterrupted forest. There's this quote that just perfectly captures his philosophy here. From the East, light. From the West, fruit. The established, civilized world might give us the light of history and knowledge, sure, but the untamed wilderness is where humanity actually bears fruit. It's where we grow, it's where we find our deepest vitality. And that brings us right to the core thesis of his entire essay. He equates this westward movement, this instinctual pull, directly with the wild. The West is basically just another name for the wild. And it's here that he makes his most famous, most powerful declaration. In wildness is the preservation of the world. This right here is the climax of his argument. He points out that every great civilization, even going back to Romulus and Remus being suckled by a wolf, draws its actual vigor and survival from untamed wild sources. If a society becomes entirely domesticated, entirely tame, it withers, it gets conquered by the children of the northern forests who still have that wild marrow in their bones. We literally require an infusion of wildness in our tea to survive. He drives this home with a super vivid, almost shocking sensory contrast. He asks us to compare the merchant to a wild antelope. Do you want your clothes to smell of dusty exchanges, stale libraries, and enclosed offices? Or do you want your very skin to emit the delicious perfume of trees and grass, like an antelope bounding through the plains? He wants us to be so much a part of nature that our very presence advertises the wild places we inhabit. All right, bringing this back to you and me. We've talked a lot about Thoreau's extreme, poetic ideals, but how do we actually apply this to our modern, paved-over, hyper-connected lives? We can't all just abandon our jobs and walk into the unbroken wilderness for 4 hours a day like he did, right? So where is your wild, and how do you find it? Well, here are some actual, actionable takeaways directly drawn from the text. First off, get off the highway. Thoreau points out that roads are made for horses and men of business, so find the discontinued paths. Find the messy edges of your town. Second, you absolutely have to leave your indoor thoughts behind. He says it's of no use to direct our steps to the woods if our minds don't carry us there. If you're thinking about your emails in the forest, you are out of your senses. Third, intentionally seek out the unmanicured swamps and bogs over those perfectly curated gardens. And finally, walk for absolute freedom, not just to hit a workout metric. I absolutely love this specific point about the swamps. It sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? But this is exactly why he prefers the unfathomable, quaking bog over a polite, manicured lawn. You cannot tame a swamp. It entirely resists being boxed in, paved over, or perfectly understood. And the profound lesson here is that you shouldn't entirely tame yourself either. You need a little bit of that quaking bog inside your own spirit to stay truly alive. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Think about your routine tomorrow. The next time you step outside and feel the wind on your face, what will you actually be doing? Will you just be getting your steps in, rushing to a destination, head down in your phone? Or will you finally be ready to saunter, to embark on a crusade to reclaim your own wildness? The choice is entirely yours.